I want to welcome everyone here at the chapel, as well as all of you that are viewing the service online. We're about to begin the services for Dr. Richard Allen Shapiro. Just a gentle reminder for those of you present in the chapel, if you have a cell phone with you, please place it in the silent mode or turn it off completely. That would be appreciated. The interment will take place following the service at West Lawn Cemetery, located in Norridge. If you're joining us in procession, we'll make sure that your vehicle has the orange funeral sticker as well as a flag, a magnetic flag for the top of your car. The Shiva will be observed at the Shapiro residence in Evanston at 3925 Lyons Street. Will be a traditional Shiva, and please consult your service folders for the various specific times and minyan times as well. It's also on our website. Service this morning will be conducted by Rabbi Ari Hart, and at this time, if everyone will please rise as the family enters the sanctuary.
We're here today to give honor, to remember a leader, a great man, Dr. Richard Shapiro, Zorach Aaron ben Zev ve'etel, beloved husband to Rita, father David, Peter, and Michael, grandfather Joseph, Jacob, Micah, Nathan, Daniel, Bill, Alex, Katie, and Matt. It's a beautiful sight to see this whole row filled with progeny. We'll begin this morning with a recitation of Psalms, Psalm 23. A psalm in many ways very appropriate for Dr. Shapiro. A psalm about equanimity in the face of death, about pursuing goodness and kindness, about feeling the blessings of life and appreciating them in life. Following that, Dr. David Shapiro will share some words of reflection, and I'll conclude. Then Dr. Jane Shapiro will ascend and recite the Kel Maleh prayer, at which point Richard's casket will be brought in and I, as a Cohen, will step out, and then the service will conclude. We'll begin with Psalm 23. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai Rabbi lo echsar, bino deshet yarbitzeini ame menuchot yinahaleni, nafshi yeshovev yancheni bebaglei tzedek leman shemo, gam ki elech begeit salmavet, Lo irara ki atai madi, shivtecha mishantecha hema yenachamuni, taroch lefanai shulchan neged sorerai dishanta v'Hashem roshi kosi revaya, ach tov v'chesed yurdafuni kol yemei chayai, v'shavti beveit Adonai le'orech yamim. A song of David, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. God causes me to lie down in lush pastures. God leads me beside tranquil waters. God restores my soul and guides me in righteous paths for God's name's sake. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your scepter and staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in full view of my adversaries. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. May only goodness and kindness pursue me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord for the length of days. Dr. Shapiro.
My father was born in 1927. His family lived in Logan Square. His grandparents had come from southwest Lithuania at the turn of the century from Mariampol in Kosovo. No, not Kosovo, Kovno. His parents were born in Chicago. His father left home at 16, took himself to the University of Chicago, and became a physician. He started a practice in Logan Square and spent some of his time running a diabetes clinic at Cook County Hospital. The earlier generation went to the first Marmpoler Shul at Polk and Ashland, and later moved to, at least in the family, the legendary Spalding Avenue Shul in Humboldt Park. My father was sent to the Darwin Public School and was enrolled in Hebrew school at the Fullerton Avenue Synagogue, largely to placate his great-grandfather. He entered the Roosevelt Public High School at age 13 in Albany Park, at that time the preferred school for Jewish kids across the entire mid-northwest side. He prospered there, played tennis, made friends, including lifelong friends, Bob Mendelsohn and Asher Birnbaum. He did not meet my mother there. She was in his brother's class 3 years behind, but he caught a glimpse of her as she walked across the stage to receive her diploma at high school graduation in 1947. He had started college at the University of Chicago at age 16. He had a fine time there, by his account. He read great books. Left quickly after 2 years, however, to start medical school at Loyola. And he finally caught up with her again on a Friday night at a social gathering at the Fullerton Avenue Shul, introduced to him by his brother. They started dating. They got married on Christmas Eve 1950 at the Blackstone Hotel. The Korean War was unfolding. He had finished a year's internship at that time, and he quickly signed up for the doctor's draft, as he told me, to avoid becoming an infantryman or even worse, an army cook. And he reported to Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas, 6 weeks after they were married. He then deployed to Germany a month later, not to Korea, but to Germany, to prepare for the looming war against Soviet expansionism. My mother was allowed to join him in Europe 6 months later. His duties as a young lieutenant at that time consisted of maneuvers and drills 4 to 5 days a week. They had the weekends off. And on the weekends, the two of them would take short trips throughout Europe to Belgium Paris, Italy, and in December of 1952 to the island of Majorca. He finished his tour of duty and they returned to Chicago in 1953, reportedly with me in utero. Moved into the family compound in Logan Square. He completed his surgical training at Michael Reese Hospital and was taken into practice by Morris Parker, a prominent Southside Jewish surgeon. Peter came in 1956, and when Michael came in 1959, the new family struck out on its own and moved to South Shore. He was 32 years old. We went to public school, and he enrolled us in the Hebrew school at Rotfei Zedek congregation in Hyde Park. I asked him later on why he had gone to the trouble in the face of his frequently voiced profound antipathy to organized religion of any sort. He replied simply that we were obliged to learn enough to make enlightened decisions about our own relationship to Judaism, rather than to reject it entirely on the basis of ignorance. He serendipitously created a space for himself and for us in the engaged conservative Jewish community in 1961, when on a whim he answered a want-ad notice posted on the bulletin board in the doctor's lounge at Michael Reese Hospital, seeking a physician for a 2-week summer camp gig at Camp Ramah in Wisconsin, near Eagle River. We had a fine time there. The weather was terrible. It was the first 2 weeks of June, and it was cold and rainy. The cabin was drafty, and we made friends with the chipmunks and the raccoons. We went swimming in the lake when it was warm enough, and we had a good time driving around the North Woods to look at the sights and tourist attractions. He particularly enjoyed the adult intellectual community that populated camp at the time, conversing and matching wits with such luminaries, local luminaries of the day as Seymour Fox, Moshe Davidson, Rabbi Nathan Gordon, and others. When we were old enough, he enrolled us as campers for the summer there, and he and my mother returned there for most of the next 10 years. Family life for us growing up in South Shore was wonderful. In the early years, he was often absent, working the busy schedule of a newly started general surgeon. As we grew up a bit and he was more available, he kept us busy and entertained. Weekends always consisted of some combination of playing tennis, going to the movies, finding interesting restaurants to eat in. But we also learned from him the value and importance of visiting and caring for our grandparents and older relatives, and we found ourselves frequently driving up and down the highways from the south side to Logan Square and to Skokie, where my mother's parents lived. He and my mother filled the evenings with opera, Chicago Symphony concerts, and the Goodman Theater. They had a devotion to the Goodman Theater. They often walked out at intermission deciding that the production wasn't very good, but it never stopped them from renewing their subscription. They took great books courses together, and at one point invested a couple years in taking Hebrew classes at City College with Irving Skolnick, who had been the director of the Hebrew school that we had attended as children. They traveled to New York periodically to go to the theater, take in the sights, and to eat in fine French restaurants. He took Mom skiing, and after several attempts, this became a regular family vacation destination for us over several years. He was a passionate lifelong reader, perhaps the legacy of his abbreviated University of Chicago career. The bookcases at home were crammed with modern and more classical fiction, works of philosophy, politics, and ethics, along with his dusty medical books, which lived in the corner behind his desk. At some point, he actually appeared to have dabbled a bit in ancient Greek based on the row of books I found on the shelves in a corner that I hadn't seen before. His medical practice was somewhat idiosyncratic. He originally thought of becoming a psychiatrist. He thought that of all people, the mentally ill were the saddest and suffered most of all, and therefore were most deserving of patient and non-judgmental, compassionate help. His father, the neighborhood family doctor and internist, who had himself performed a number of basic surgical procedures early in his own career, I can only imagine, prevailed upon him to pursue a career in general surgery, in his view, and perhaps he was a bit envious, thought that surgery was the queen of the arts and that surgeons were able to diagnose and cure all manner of illnesses inaccessible even to the best of internists. My dad's take on his surgical career, as he put it, was that he enjoyed holding people's hands and taking out their gallbladders. And it seemed as if the former was as much important to him as the latter. He had many patients over the years with complex surgical issues with whom he maintained lifelong friendships, several of whom I inherited when he stopped practicing. When his surgical career started to wind down, he looked for something else to do, and in 1993, at the age of 66, he announced that he was leaving the practice to become a full-time hospice doctor. I said, "And when is that happening?" He said, "Oh, 2 weeks." He went to work for the Vitas Corporation. This was a no-brainer for him. He spent the next 21 years driving around the city, making house calls to provide comfort and support for the dying and their families, often in neighborhoods where he actually needed an escort from curb to the doorstep to keep him from harm. I want to speak for a minute about his moral and political sensibilities as they informed his professional life. He was a good reader and a critical thinker. On the shelf were copies of the Old Testament, Bertrand Russell, Marx, Franz Fanon, and in 1968, Eldridge Cleaver. The periodicals that appeared in the house in the 1960s and 70s included The New Yorker, The New Republic, Commentary, and occasionally Ramparts. For any of you who grew up in and around Hyde Park, you might remember that as a fairly radical left-wing pamphlet. All of them at the time were mouthpieces for left-leaning thinking ranging from the moderate to the rather extreme. He voted for Norman Thomas for president several times as a younger man, routinely for qualified Democratic candidates at all levels of government. He took his principles to work with him every day. He didn't talk much about this, but in 1970, he joined a cadre of Michael Reese physicians and signed up for volunteer work at the Black Panther Clinic at 16th and Avers, and held regular weekly evening clinics there until the operation closed a year or two later. He spent several months at the Ark in Albany Park at the time. Ultimately, he participated in the opening of the St. Basil's Free Clinic in Garfield on Garfield Boulevard in Englewood, starting in 1982. He practiced pro bono primary care medicine there on Wednesday evenings from 1982 until 2005, extending for 12 years after he had given up his surgery practice. We prevailed upon him to retire from his hospice job at the age of 87, when it became unseemly and unsafe for him to be driving alone around the city. In his retirement, he decided that he wanted to learn to play the viola and to study calculus, having missed the opportunity both in high school and in college. He found, however, that his fingers were too arthritic to reach the frets on the instrument, and the review book of all high school mathematics that he was handed by the chairman of the mathematics department at City College wore him out even before he got to geometry. He spent his last few good years at home with Mom, making the most of their time together, until creeping dementia slowly started to limit his cognition and his physical abilities. He was very resolute about dying at home without any fanfare, content to sit on the sofa with her in the den, reading Montaigne or Middlemarch, although often reading the same 100 pages over and over again, watching old movies that they ordered from Netflix, and the tennis matches on TV. Until a few days before he died, he could still see her through his dementia. He would recognize her and smile. She cared for him lovingly and selflessly to the end. He was 96 years old, and they were married for 73 years.
The definitive work on the laws and customs and traditions around Jewish death and mourning, written by Rav Yechiel Michal Tukashinsky, is called the Gesher HaChaim, the Bridge of Life. Listening last night to Richard's sons retelling his life, and my own experiences with him at family gatherings, this image of the Gesher HaChaim, the bridge of life, resonates for me. This was Dr. Shapiro, a bridge. A bridge requires strength. A bridge must be enduring. It bears weight. It provides a foundation of strength and reliability for thousands of patients whom he served, for his children, his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and of course for his beloved Rita, who just as he supported her, she supported him, and together were that bridge of life, that foundation. Dr. Shapiro was a bridge between worlds. He served as a bridge between an Alterheim, an old world and new worlds. A man who inherited firsthand stories and values from the 19th century and then lived alive and alert and well into the 21st century. A bridge between the worlds of first-generation immigrants, of peddlers on Maxwell Street, the world of the family compound in Logan Square, the axis mundi around which the whole world revolved. Bridging that and those values forward to his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, whom he mentored and taught and imparted wisdom. He bridged the worlds of tradition and modernity. As David said, he made a connection with his Jewish heritage of his grandfather, Nachum's lost world. A strong connection to Jewish community, Jewish education, but bridging into that his rationalist thought, his critical inquiry, unafraid to ask hard questions, challenging the committed, including this young rabbi, to really think about the values and meanings of our tradition in light of philosophy and ethics. His career had a bridge-like aspect to it. He devoted the first half of his career to the act of saving life, and the second half to being there as life ended. I would venture, I don't have the statistics, but I would venture that this is quite rare. The move from surgeon to hospice doctor. I would venture very few have made that transition. Surgeons, their professional and oftentimes personal identities closely tied to their ability to intervene, to fix, and to prolong life. And hospice care is seemingly the opposite, where the goals of treatment are comfort and support rather than curative. It's a profound shift. But for Dr. Shapiro, it was natural. He bridged them both with kindness. He was the surgeon who made house calls. So it was very natural for him as a hospice doctor to make the house calls. And as David so beautifully said, just as important as removing the gallbladder was the holding of the hand. He worked as a hospice doctor until his late 80s. He certainly did not have to, because simply he liked being kind to people. He liked to be there for people. He liked to help people, helping people cross the river. He was that bridge for them. And he also served as a Gesher HaChaim, a bridge of life, for how to cross and to navigate the turbulent waters of this world. A man of deep principle, someone who faced reality with a guiding and anchoring set of teachings and values. One of his favorites, the ends of man are wisdom and goodness. This quote echoes the powerful quote from Micha, from the book of Micah. The quote that answers the fundamental question that we all ask: what are we supposed to do in this world? And the prophet Micah says, Higid lecha Adam, I'll tell you, ma tov, what's good. Ki im asot mishpat, ve'avat chesed, ve'atznei lechet im Elokecha. I'll tell you what is good and what God requires from you. Ma Hashem doresh mimeka. What does God want from us? Only to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. This fundamental Jewish teaching that how we walk with God is ultimately how we walk with other people. And how we walk with other people is ultimately how we walk with God. I think Dr. Shapiro understood this very well. And he lived this way, and he taught this way, and it was his end. The end of Richard Shapiro is wisdom and goodness. The wisdom he possessed and shared, the wisdom of books and arts and culture, but more critically, his goodness, his kindness, his menschlichkeit. And his wisdom and his goodness does not end with him. It echoes in all those he encountered and touched. The wisdom he encouraged in his progeny, probing and questioning and supporting. The wisdom and goodness reflected and refracted so beautifully in his sons, David, Peter, and Michael. Each of you who possesses aspects of your father, and each of you so unique. Dr. Shapiro was famous, perhaps a little infamous, for his grappling with the Akedah, with the story of Abraham's binding of Isaac. He would challenge you. What do you think? What do you think about the Akedah? I think he asked me this several times. The Danish theologian and philosopher Søren Kierkegaard presents Abraham as embodying a hero by willingly sacrificing his son Isaac in obedience to God's command, transcending his own ethical impulses in pursuit of the divine and making a heroic leap of faith. Dr. Shapiro did not agree with Kierkegaard. Richard did not make leaps of faith. When he was in the army, he was given the opportunity to become a paratrooper, to leap out of airplanes, and his mother's stern response, "Our family does not jump out of airplanes." No leaps of faith. So if Kierkegaard's understanding of the trial of Abraham was a test to suspend what you think is right for something else, then Dr. Shapiro failed that test. But if the test of Abraham was to see if he would act with kindness and compassion in challenging circumstances, then Abraham, as Dr. Shapiro and others have argued, in that moment with his son, Abraham was the failure. And if the test was to hold by principles and values and ethics and kindness and goodness to the end, Richard passed the test. He crossed the river. He did justice. He loved kindness again and again because it was the right thing to do. And because he did, he served as a Gesher Chaim, a bridge for us, strong, supportive, guiding, and enduring. And so, inspired by him, may we humbly walk the Gesher Chaim, the bridge of life, with justice and kindness and wisdom and goodness. And by doing so, his memory shall surely be for a blessing. Yehi Zichro Baruch. I'll invite everyone to rise as his casket will be escorted in.
El Malei Rachamim, Shochein Bamaromim, Hamtzei Menucha Nechona Al Kanfei Hashchina, B'Mahalot Kedoshim Utahorim, Kezohar Harakia Mashirim, Et Nishmat Zorach Aaron, Ben Sa'eh Ve'etel, שהלך לעולמו. בעבור שאנו מתפללים בעד הזכרת נשמתו. בגן עדן תהיה מנוחתו. לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים. ויצרור בצרור החרים את נשמתו. Adonai hu nachalato, vayanuach b'shalom al mishkavo, v'nomar amen. O God, full of compassion, who dwells on high, grant proper repose on the sheltering wings of your presence, in the lofty levels of the holy and pure, who shine as the brightness of the firmament, unto the soul of Richard Allen, son of William and Ethel, who has gone to his world and for whose memory we pray. May his repose be in paradise. May the Master of compassion bring him under the cover of God's wings and bind his soul in the bond of life. May the Lord be his heritage, and may he repose on his resting place in peace. And let us say, Amen.